English translation, 384th contact. Saturday, 16th April 2005, 21:43 hours.
Hello, my friend. Good to see you again after such a long absence.
The pleasure is also mine, dear friend Edward. Be greeted. What has happened? Your index finger.
Greetings and welcome, Ptah, my friend. Well, my finger. Unfortunately, I was so stupid as to come into conflict with the hand crank of Selena's transporting machine, almost cutting my finger off. But in the misfortune I was lucky, because from the middle phalanx to the fingernail, it covered only the back of my finger and the whole width up to the bone. The doctor, Dr. Mushinvila, then did some good sewing work. First, he had to patch everything up on the inside with 10 stitches, and then he had to put everything in order again on the outside with 16 stitches. Although the finger is still enormously swollen, as you can see, and that after 3 weeks. It still hurts a bit, but it is bearable. That was it, my friend. It happened about 3 weeks ago. What's left now will be fine. So your help is no longer necessary. When it happened, it would have been necessary, but you were already underway somewhere with Quetzal, Florina, and Injana, etc., so I could not reach you anymore. Now I really do not need any more help, and I cannot and will not complain.
Complaining is not in your nature either. Very unfortunate. It would now be too late to do anything to heal, because I see that the healing process is proceeding normally. You must have been in a lot of pain when the accident happened.
Oh, that was actually bearable, besides my cursing like, shit, damn, that too, eased the whole thing. Of course there was blood everywhere in front of the house entrance, because it flowed from the damaged finger like from a slaughtered pig. When the whole thing was stitched up an hour and a half later, the bleeding had stopped, which was good, as the doctor said.
That is correct, because otherwise the bleeding would have had to be stopped before the treatment.
Well, like they say, the dumb get lucky. But may I confront you right at the beginning with some things that seem important to me?
There is no question of stupidity with you, but I understand that this is supposed to be funny. Certainly, we can move on to the things you wish to speak of. In private, we can talk later.
Good. Then in regard to the following kitchen conversation, I would like to ask if the facts are correct.
Kitchen conversation from the 28th of November, 1984.
Question: what causes manifestations of mental fluidal powers, and what do they contain? And what are mental fluidal powers and how do they work? And what about the body's own mental fluidal powers? For example, when organs of one person are implanted into another.
Answer: unfortunately, at the present time and even at the end of the 20th century, terrestrial humans have not yet reached the point where they are able to physically grasp, measure, and explain the mental fluidal powers, and consequently there is still complete ignorance in this regard. This is also the case with regard to the transmission of the mental fluidal powers to other humans, when transplants of other deceased or living people are implanted into them. Confusion is also caused by those elements that try to explain the whole thing from a religious or spiritualistic and esoteric point of view with nonsense, which contributes to the fact that everything is misunderstood and viewed from a perspective of delusional belief. Now, as far as organ transplantation is concerned, when an organ of one person is transplanted into another, it is not a harmless matter. Because the truth is this: the body's own mental fluidal powers or swinging waves are so massive that they are very strongly deposited or stored in all organs. The mental fluidal powers or mental swinging waves contain in their energies and powers everything that is generated by the mental block as well as by the personality and character. Therefore, it contains not only the energies and powers of thoughts and feelings, as well as of the psyche and consciousness, but also the hopes, desires, habits, and idiosyncrasies, etc. of the person, which are deposited in the body and all its organs. In the same wise, however, this also happens in a neutral manner when the mental fluidal powers are deposited in rooms, places, or objects, which can then be used again by the next personality after its birth. It follows that new personalities can then adopt and express the characteristics and behavior, etc. of their old personalities. However, this is not obligatory, because it is solely up to each individual personality whether or not it accepts or does not accept the neutral things in the deposited mental swinging waves and their energies, and which powers old peculiarities and behaviors through reconnections. What in further explanation concerns the transplantation of organs from one person to another is that these are absolutely not harmless, as is unfortunately generally and specifically assumed by the medical profession. The truth is that the strongest deposits of mental swinging waves, with their energies and powers, that is to say the mental fluidal powers, are primarily and extremely strongly deposited in the entire body, and thus in its organs and skeleton. All mental fluidal powers are stored as solid and permanent information in all body cells. It should be noted that the information of the mental block is deposited in the body's organs and in the entire cell system within seconds, thus creating an organic memory and a cellular memory, which then become effective in relation to the transfer of the stored mental cell information to another person when transplants are carried out, or when a person has an organ implanted by another person. So if an organ or a bone is taken from a human being, alive or deceased, and transplanted to another living human being, then this has unpleasant consequences. The fact is that the transplanted organ transmits its mental swinging waves, energies, powers, and information to the entire body, and even to the brain and consciousness of the person to whom the bone or organ is implanted. And since the mental fluidal swinging waves of the transplant organ of the person from whom it was removed are also transferred to the organ receiving person through the transplant, this means that peculiarities, wishes, hopes, fears, and joys, as well as behavioral patterns, are also transferred. This can then be seen in the wise that the person who has had a foreign organ implanted inevitably sooner or later adopts the idiosyncrasies and behavior and even the mindset, etc. of the person who was the organ donor or bone donor. Of course, not all organs and cells are equally powerful in storing mental information, so there are great differences. The strongest organ in terms of storing mental swinging waves, energies, powers, and information is the heart, followed by all other important organs of life. And since the mental information storage in the organs and cells takes place in a matter of seconds, it is also clear that even horror experiences, etc., are still transmitted and stored in the event of sudden death. And consequently, the impulses in this regard are transferred to the person receiving the transplant in the case of an organ transplant. Sudden death is therefore also stored as mental swinging waves, energies, and powers in the cells and organs, just like all other things that arise in mental form in the course of life.
Question: then transplants are really not harmless?
Answer: organ transplants are never harmless, no matter what organ or bone it is, because even an eye or a finger has an effect on the mental fluidal power. Implanted organs and bones will always cause, and in fact always, some minor or major changes in the organ recipient, and in the worst case, blatant personality changes will occur in the form of the organ recipient adopting the personality of the organ donor. So it is possible, for example, that a person who receives the heart of a murderer implanted in him or her may become a murderer themselves. These are facts that are still disputed by doctors, etc. today, but time will prove that it is true and is not some deviant or esoteric theory and nonsense.
Question: Where does today's knowledge about these things come from?
Answer. This knowledge comes from private conversations with the Pleiar and Ptah and Quetzal.
The facts of the matter are correctly stated.
Good. Then I want to integrate the whole thing into my new book, Fluidal Powers. Then something else. As you know, for some time now there has been a lot of activity around the world regarding slander against me. Secret services, alleged UFO researchers as well as know-it-alls and malicious opponents of all kinds are trying desperately to defame me and my work with all kinds of unfair means. Some so-called UFO researchers and UFO know-it-alls of self-proclaimed graces have been at work again for a long time, in order to foist space pictures, dinosaur pictures and UFO pictures on me with the lie that these were made by me on my great journey in 1975, or that I am supposed to have falsified them by photographing or copying them from existing pictures of some draftsmen and artists. Hans Georg has written the following article, which I want to publish in a special bulletin, if you want to read it.
Of course. I am aware of all this, but I would like to comment on it in German and Swiss German as follows. Only those who are dirty in their dealings must justify and defend themselves, in contrast to those who are slandered and need no justification. And furthermore, it is only those who slander their fellow human beings who have so much dirt on them that they can no longer see it. In other words, the one who slanders other human beings is so laden with dirt himself or herself that they are no longer able to recognize themselves under it. This is an ancient wisdom, which is also known to us, but which we express in somewhat different and more moderate words. In my opinion, however, a coarse language is fully justified in the named matter among the Earth humans, which is why I was urged to express my opinion with the mentioned terms. But to the attacks directed against you concerning the photographic materials, on your great voyage alone, you took more than 1 to 378 photographs in 1975. Whereas there were 1,568 photographs of beam ships. As you know, a large part of your material of our photos of beam ships was falsified by the photographer Schmid under the pressure of a certain organization of the MIB and then planted on you again, just as it happened with your film and photo material of the Great Journey. The films and slides showing our beam ships were so meticulously falsified that suddenly threads were visible as if models had been hung up and photographed, as was the case with your self-proclaimed arch-enemy Cal Korff in a horror storybook and in a swindle film. With the participation of your dear ex-wife, who, full of hatred, tried to brand you as a swindler, liar, and cheat, because she could not be in the front line in her lust for power and domination. I do not want to scold her with this, as you never do, nor do I want to hold grudges against her with my words, but only to point out the true facts.
A fake dinosaur photo as alleged evidence against Billy Eduard Albert Meier. Billy Eduard Albert Meier.
Or for years, a dinosaur photo has been used as alleged evidence against Billy Edward Albert Meier, which, in fact, was not taken by Billy. At the moment, the internet is once again being used as a heavy weapon against Billy Edward Albert Meier. Billy Edward Albert Meier. Know-it-alls are boasting in internet forums and articles with alleged competence in the UFO Meier case. Once again, however, the antagonists and allegedly highly qualified Billy Meier specialists prove themselves to be superficial bunglers and ignorant parroters. With kettle drums and trumpets and storm roar, they have been greedily throwing themselves for years at an alleged Meier photo of a flying dinosaur feeding its young. In their blindness and revelation mania, Billy Edward Albert Meier's opponents stubbornly claim that this photo was taken by Billy himself on the space voyage of July 1975, without, however, dealing with the true history of its creation and the real context of the picture. Their claims in this regard are nothing more than gullibly parroted, cheap phrases of pseudo-ufologists, such as Cal Korff. In fact, the mentioned photo was not taken by Billy Meier on Niebuhr, even though the opposite is stubbornly claimed. In fact, during the 31st contact with Sim Yaseh on the 17th of July 1975, a journey to the galaxy Beberus to the world neighbor in the system Cras took place. The dinosaur-inhabited world Niebuhr is located 9,180 million light-years away from Earth. These facts can be read in the bound edition of the Pleiadian Plei-Aran Contact Reports, Volume 1, 2002, on page 432, sentences 575 ff. During the journey, Billy Edward Albert Meier actually took some photographs of various primeval animals and humans, and of pyramids, some of which are shown in the above-mentioned book edition. However, these dinosaur photos of the 17th of July 1975 have never been officially sold to the public via Figu or Billy Meier for good reason. After returning from his journey to the planet Niebuhr, the pictures, like many of the first photos, were developed and edited by the photographer Schmid, who has since passed away. This is the photographer who was described by Hans-Georg Lanzendorfer in the article entitled Asket and Nera, American Doubles on Photos of the True Contact Man to Extraterrestrial Intelligences. Billy Edward Albert Meier, subsequently falsified by a foreign hand and published in the Figu, Bulletin Number 16 of June 1998. After the newly developed dinosaur pictures were in the hands of Billy, they were cited and controlled by Quetzal. He noticed dozens of pictures that clearly could not have been taken from the neighbor world and therefore had not been taken by Billy, which made Quetzal very angry. It was obvious that once again, Billy Edward Albert Meier had been manipulated and faked by someone else. Many of the pictures had obviously been taken from a book and were supposed to be smuggled into Billy Edward Albert Meier's photo collection as so-called cuckoo eggs. This was especially the case with the photograph of a flying dinosaur with ejected fish and a white spot on its belly. With the help of this forgery, Billy was one day to be convicted as a fraud and contact swindler. Due to the manipulations, the photos were immediately confiscated and destroyed by Quetzal in the mid-1970s, even before they could be circulated by the Figu or Billy. The dinosaur photo in question, along with various others, is still being circulated on the internet today as a Billy Meier fake, even though Billy has always vehemently refused to be ascribed. However, before the original photos were removed and destroyed by Quetzal, the founding member of the Figu, Guido Moosbrugger, came into possession of some copies. However, he had to promise to the Plei-Aran and Billy never to make the prints available to the public and never to sell them in any wise, because the forgery by a third party was also among the preserved photos. If he did not comply with the instruction, the pictures were to be confiscated and destroyed by the Plei-Aran immediately, just like the originals of Billy. Until today, Guido Moosbrugger feels bound to his promise and has always kept the pictures under lock and key. In the course of the joint correction work on the contact reports with Ptah, Florena, Njana, Billy, and Bernadette Brand, the time for clarification had also come. In 2001, Guido was asked by Billy to provide some of the photos for publication in the corrected Pleiadian Plei-Aran contact report block. Therefore, since the year 2001, a few real dinosaur pictures and slides from Guido Moosbrugger's possession are again in Billy's possession, but they remain strictly under lock and key. For the publication in the contact report block,
with the help of Ptah, it was strictly observed that these were only real or only slightly falsified pictures of Billy's by Schmid, whereas the mentioned falsification was not used for logical reasons.
For this reason, the photo of the pterosaur, which was forged by someone else, is not shown in the new bound Pleiadian Plei-Aran contact report block No. 1. Unfortunately, it cannot be excluded that certain jealous, malicious persons within the group around Billy, Edward Albert Meier, who managed the film, slide, negative, and photo material, deliberately circulated the forged photos even before they were destroyed. This was done with the malicious intention of making Billy appear to be a swindler and fraud against their better judgment. It is no secret that Billy Edward Albert Meier was slandered and deceived in his own circles as early as 1975, that is to say, at the beginning of his contacts with Simja Se, Entrechi Stabensrauben, and Gay, by his ex-wife as well as by other evil-minded group members, to whom manipulations of film, slide, negative, and photo material can also be attributed. Apparently, these people have also circulated fake dinosaur pictures to harm Billy and make it impossible for him. Interestingly enough, despite Quetzal's destruction of the original photos, the fake photo, among other fakes, suddenly appeared, which was and is claimed to be part of the Billy Edward Albert Meier dinosaur photo series from the planet Niebuhr. In fact, the said photo was initially part of the collection and in the possession of Billy until its destruction. However, as already explained, it was recognized as a fake after it was handed over by photographer Schmid to Quetzal, along with about 1,462 others. In his trust in photographer Schmid, Billy probably did not expect to be cheated, so he did not check the photos individually for possible manipulations. Since the appearance of the fake photo, certain elements have always been used to make the world believe that the photo was taken by Billy. This is despite Billy Edward Albert Meier's opposition to the attribution of the fake photo. Logically, Billy could not claim ownership of the fake photo because he simply did not take it, along with many others that are being framed. Allegations to the contrary are malicious allegations. Nevertheless, certain elements, contrary to the true facts, always deny its integrity. The Play-Aron investigations of this incident revealed the following. Since the organization called Men in Black could not eliminate him after several failed assassinations in the end, 21 of them in total, which they committed against Billy, they forced people working with Billy, such as the above-mentioned photographer Schmid, to discredit Billy Edward Albert Meier in a very massive wise. They meticulously planned their intrigues and defamations for the long term, so that the effects of their actions would only begin to be felt in the near future. On several occasions, the Men in Black also tried to achieve their goal in the Simja Se Silver Star Center by attacking the members' vehicles or by intimidating and abducting children, etc. In this form, the photographer Schmid was also forced by the Men in Black to make fakes of the photographs that Billy had taken with the permission of the Pleiadian Play-Aron. On several occasions, pictures that Schmid had received from Billy were forged from scratch or replaced by fakes, as happened with the Ascot Nera photographs and the dinosaur photograph mentioned above. In this wise, Edward A. Meier received unnoticed false slides, negatives, or manipulated photos back from Schmid already at the beginning of his contacts with the Pleiadian Play-Aron. This photographer has since passed away and is therefore no longer able to provide any information about these manipulations. For Billy Edward Albert Meier, it was initially not easy to find a trustworthy photographer who developed his UFO pictures in an honest wise without altering them. Even after the development, his pictures were not safe from desecrating access in early years, because they were abused and passed on for falsification purposes already at the beginning of the contacts by administrative persons like H.S. and Billy's ex-wife and companions. Thus, in addition to the originals, forged pictures are still in the possession of Figu today, into which unknown persons have subsequently manipulated extremely amateurish threads and hanging devices. It is a fact that at no time were any fake dinosaur photos knowingly published by Billy or the Figu as real photos by Billy. Such pictures are still not offered for sale among the officially available photos in the visitor albums. The so-called dinosaur photos are also not listed in the FIGU photo directory. It is known that Billy Edward Albert Meier had over 1,500 UFO photos, of which the photographer Schmid falsified several. In addition, in the first years, about 1,200 pictures were stolen from partly unknown sides, which never appeared again. Various photos and negatives were published in journals, etc. worldwide, which enabled Billy to buy back his own pictures and negatives for expensive prices to bring them back into his possession. Of course, not all of his photos can be made available for sale by Billy, because it is simply impossible to get hold of all the stolen pictures. Therefore, only the well-known and often desired pictures are offered to the visitors. Since the so-called dinosaur photos were recognized as fake and destroyed by Quetzal, they are logically not available for sale today. There is no doubt that without the machinations of former malicious group members, and without the men in black manipulations, the dinosaur photos would be as accessible to the visitors as are the rest of the real beamship photos. If Billy Edward Albert Meier had actually faked his UFO photos, as his opponents claim, he would probably be unscrupulous enough to bring the faked dinosaur photos among the people. Billy, however, will be careful not to circulate not only his genuine pictures, which have been scientifically examined and found to be genuine, but also the dinosaur photos faked by someone else. On the one hand, he lacks the necessary greed for profit and unscrupulousness. On the other hand, such nonsense and mischief would endanger his true mission to the highest degree and finally make it impossible. As a member with about 20 years of membership in the FIGU Association, and due to many years of trustful cooperation with Billy Edward Albert Meier, I can confirm that the mentioned dinosaur picture has never been passed around in the FIGU circle as a Billy photo or declared as such. A few years ago, the core group members of the association enjoyed a short film, which Billy had taken on his great space journey, and which documents the dinosaur world. The film showed a primeval world in black and white, as well as some dinosaurs and prehistoric humans moving through this area. It is a fact that the opponents of Billy never honestly cared about the true origin of the dinosaur picture and did not investigate the real source. Otherwise, they would have found out that the pictures were not circulated by the FIGU or Billy Meier, but by a malevolent foreign hand with the intention of harming him. Many allegedly well-known UFO researchers and self-proclaimed Meier connoisseurs have jumped on the bandwagon of falsification and distortion of facts in their revelation mania without investigating the true sources. This practice can be found on the internet in countless articles about Billy Edward Albert Meier. The effective truth about the photo, however, will one day make many a ufologist jump over the shadow of an embarrassing disgrace. In fact, there is no real evidence that the photo was taken by Billy Meier. Billy Edward Albert Meier has never claimed this with a single word or written testimony, based on the simple fact that this picture of the pterosaur, among many other fakes, was not taken by Billy Edward Albert Meier himself, but was planted by someone else. These facts correspond to the facts, even if the truth does not want to be accepted by his opponents, as so often. Obviously, in the mid-1970s, it was part of the plan of a sleazy counterfeiting organization of the Men in Black and traitorous FIGU members who, as a result of their useless efforts of destruction, finally left the FIGU of their own accord to assign the aforementioned picture to the collection of Billy Meier's photographs, along with various other forgeries. It was their goal to confront him one day with the fact of a fake, as they almost succeeded in doing in the case of the Ascot Nera photos. With wise foresight, Quetzal thwarted the attempt with the fake dinosaur photos as much as possible, but unfortunately some of the original dinosaur photos were confiscated and destroyed by the Pleiaren. Thus the pictures were lost, but further abuse was avoided. Unfortunately, it is no longer exactly comprehensible for the FIGU today as to who was ultimately responsible for the distribution of the forged picture in question, along with other forgeries. What is certain is that it was deliberately played into the hands of the opposing circles of Billy Edward Albert Meier. Even for the extraterrestrial Quetzal, it was extremely difficult during his investigations to find the source of the falsifications and the paths of the fake image. A participation of the men in black was therefore highly probable, since for many years it was almost impossible even for the Plejaren to get hold of these uncomfortable contemporaries. The secret of the men in black has now been revealed by the Plejar, as well as the fact that they had very high technological means at their disposal to cover their tracks, and that they got Earthlings to work for them in a forced hypnotic state. As already explained, it is an irrefutable fact that the dinosaur photos of Billy, or of FIGU, were never wished to be published. It is neither in the interest of FIGU nor in the interest of Billy Meier that, in case of his real and true contacts with extraterrestrial intelligent human life forms, the untruth is spread or that any fake UFO photos are spread. Already years ago, Heidi Peters, a German-born passive member who was active in the USA and also worked as a translator for Billy and the FIGU, should have published an explanatory article about dinosaur photos because she was very familiar with the effects of the machinations. Unfortunately, after a serious illness, she could no longer fulfill this task. The truth about the so-called dinosaur photos will be hard to find for the notorious professional critics, because through the mentioned photo, a certain inconsistency in the case of UFO Meier could actually be found. An inconsistency that has a lot to do with the fact that the photo is actually a fake. To the chagrin of all glorious exposure specialists, however, the fake was not created by Billy Edward Albert Meier, but by his opponents themselves. Indeed, in the sense that the antagonism of the men in black to Billy Edward Albert Meier deceives the antagonism of ufologists to Billy Edward Albert Meier. Two drunkards must have slapped each other on the fingers. But at least Billy Edward Albert Meier's opponents must be allowed to do a good job in exposing this fake. To have found the book used for this purpose is not a bad achievement and also of good use for the FIGU. As a critical, searching and researching person, also in the case of Billy Meier, I am well aware of certain experiences of success in research. I must admit, however, that I would much rather use my time and energy for a proof in favor of the true truth about Billy Edward Albert Meier than for superficial and blind nitpicking. The argumentations and explanations of my article are certainly reason enough for many inveterate Billy Edward Albert Meier opponents to accuse him of deception and lies again, but now with the new reason to cover his own tracks. But the truth is not a cheap strategy. Personally, I would like to state that my many years of work as a member of the FIGU and my knowledge of human nature have not been put in the service of blurring and covering up, but in the disclosure of the facts and the true truth. The fact is that this photo was not taken by Billy Meier, as he assured me personally and credibly. But I am surprised to find that the so-called investigations of the ufologists are evidence of bumbling research, and that well-known ufologists have obviously failed to investigate the true origin of the pictures. Honest inquiries to Billy Edward Albert Meier would have brought them honest answers. In their obsession for a discovery, some Billy Edward Albert Meier opponents have probably been embarrassingly blinded by people like Cal Korff. In their fight against an alleged cheat, they themselves have been involved in organized and evil wheeling and dealing, and have been manipulated by outsiders to spread false information. This is evidence of weak self-criticism, lack of competence, and lack of qualification. Of course, the pseudo-ufologist Cal Korff stands out in this respect, who, in his moronic book about Billy Meier, falsely claims, among other things, that the picture was taken by Billy Edward Albert Meier, obviously without ever having asked whether this is true at all.
Cal Korff, however, will hardly have been interested in asking about the real facts. After all, the slander of Billy Edward Albert Meier is closer to him than the actual truth.
Hans-Werner Peiniger also blows the same horn on the internet, representing the unqualified nonsense of Cal Korff. Also, his opinion and explanation is wrong on the basis of the present and truthful facts.
Billy Meier's pterosaur photos. Hans-Werner Peiniger.
In Billy Meier's photo archive, there are a number of photographs that he claims to have taken during a 5-day trip through space on 17th July 1975 on the planet Neighbor. On Neighbor, which is said to be 1.2 million light-years away from Earth, he saw pyramids, dinosaurs, and a primitive caveman. One of the photos above, which shows a flying dinosaur, could now be identified. It shows a pteranodon from the pterosaur family. Meier's picture shows a detail of a painting below by the well-known Czech paleo drawer Zdeněk Burian, which has been published in numerous books since the 1960s. Meier probably photographed it out of focus from a book. Source: Letter to the Editor. What Billy Meier Saw by Ray Rimmel, publisher of Model Dinosaur, Berkhamsted, Hertfordshire, England, in Fortean Times, No. 98. May 1997, 54 and Cal K. Korff. Spaceships of the Pleiades, New York, 1995. Contribution from UFO number 111, 3, 1997. Hans-Georg Lanzendorfer, Switzerland.
Your ex-wife, as well as all the other slanderers, etc., will have to come to terms with their conscience sooner or later, so I do not have to play judge. Well, of the slides of the beamship photos and beamship landing tracks, etc. Almost 1/200 were stolen from you, so that today you only own a small part of the whole material, which is only the case because you were able to buy back many negative copies of your own photos for enormous sums of money worldwide, as was also the case with a mutilated copy of the demonstration film, which Michael Heseman was able to get back for you. Your ex-wife, as well as H.S., photographer Schmid, and the aforementioned MIB organization were the originators of the fact that the materials first disappeared without a trace, only to reappear later in journals and newspapers worldwide, through which you could buy back negative copies from the slide owners. Also, falsified pictures of our beamships were circulated in this wise to defame you, but these disappeared bit by bit over the years, after which your ex-wife invented new lies and claimed that you had used container lids, etc., for trick photography in relation to our beamships. And all this she did against her experiences and lived events, which she was allowed to have regarding ourselves as well as regarding our beamships, their landing tracks and siren sounds, together with various group members and their as well as your children. Witnesses for this are, for example, Jacobus Bertschinger, Bernadette Brand, I and K.S., Herbert R., Hans Jakob, F. Liniger, Engelbert and Maria Vector, Guido Moosbrugger, and others. For example, Amata Amalie Stetler, Olga Walder, Margaret Rose, Roland and Sissy Rugseger, Margaret Flammer, Margaret Rufer, Wolfgang Witzer, and many others, as well as a large number of strangers who have been witnesses by fate. She also unexpectedly met me once when I was looking for you in the living room. In addition to that, she experienced a bright materialization of one of our Confederates when you stood together with her at the doghouse and could observe everything with her. For all these reasons, it is incomprehensible to me that she could slander you and your mission and denigrate you all over the world as a swindler and cheat. The evidence that you were in contact with us, and that she was often able to experience many things herself at Firsthand was so irrefutable that it is still inexplicable to me why she invented lies about you and your work to slander you worldwide. Her imperiousness and her craving for power to be in the front line, which she failed to do, could not be the only reason. In my opinion, an unrestrained craving for money, feelings of inferiority, and the craving for recognition were also irresistible to her. But on the other hand, what has not subsided since the beginning is the thing with the fake space pictures and dinosaur pictures, because these are still circulating worldwide among your self-appointed enemies. Still, and recently more and more, fake photos are being foisted on you, which are not yours. Of the more than 378 pictures from your great journey, only a few remained, namely 42 that really came from you. While the majority of 1,336 pictures consisted of copies of some drawings, etc., that had been planted, which Quetzal quickly realized at the time, which is why he destroyed all slides and photos. This made it impossible for any slides, films, or photos of yours to be sold or given away in any other wise, so that none of these materials ever went out into the world on your part. But the accounts of your dear ex-wife, as well as of H.S., M.S., and the photographer Schmid are quite different, because our pertinent investigations clearly showed that at least these four were engaged in a real trade with the fake materials. Slides, films, negatives, and photos, which enabled H.S. to charter an airplane together with his brother and spend 3 months in the Congo in Africa. The business with your slides, films, and photos was extremely profitable for the four of them, although it is also certain that the aforementioned MIB organization, as well as others who were hostile to you and still are today, had their hands in it, even with horrendous sums of money, which is why it could also be that your ex-wife suddenly had a bank account in which 35,000 Swiss francs were hoarded. Not to mention the fact that she, like the unemployed H.S., had inexhaustible sources of money, even though they had not done any work for all these years, that would have earned them a salary and allowed them to do everything they could afford. Their worldwide trade in your slides, negatives, films, and photos was extremely lucrative, which can be seen from the fact that your ex-wife secretly sold the 1.5-hour 8mm demonstration film for 1,000 Swiss francs by the dozen, even though you only demanded 150 francs for it. Unfortunately, you did not find out about this until the 90s of the 20th century through Michael Hessman, when the speech came up. And once again, I want to say that you are not responsible for the fake space and dinosaur photos that are in circulation worldwide, because they are not from your photographic work, but in total only fakes that were made by malicious people and enemies, and which are imputed to be yours in a slanderous wise. Worldwide, no other of your dinosaur pictures and space pictures, etc., have been published other than those which are reproduced in the new contact report blocks. But these are only a few copies of the real 42 images, with very few falsifying and insignificant changes made to them. Of the 1,336 fake pictures that were planted and attributed to you, a certain number unfortunately found their way out into the world, but you are not responsible for this, so any claim to the contrary is a malicious and infamous slander. Also, the dinosaur picture mentioned by Hans Georg does not correspond to one of your recordings, but only to a malicious and slanderous manipulation of evil-minded ones who want to undermine you and your mission. These malevolent ones are all elements who, among other things, want to make themselves big at your expense and supposedly rise above their fellow humans, because they are trapped in inferiority complexes and believe that they can shine before their fellow humans through their lies and slander. but that they make themselves impossible and unspeakably ridiculous through their actions and reveal their stupidity is something they are unable to grasp because of their lack of intelligence. Furthermore, it must be said that all these morbidly stupid adversaries neither know you nor have ever cared about the real truth of your mission, and have never looked at your evidence or examined it. So they are only remotely lying and slanderous, which in itself reveals what kind of a person they are and what intelligence and honesty and virtue and righteousness they possess. They are pathological, poor humans who do not have enough initiative to really get to the bottom of something honestly and to accept the truth in order to prove that they are in error and not so great and comprehensive in their rationality and intellect as they foolishly show. There is nothing more to be said except that my words are not intended to be a justification in any wise, but only a clear and deeply truthful clarification of the existing facts.
Thank you. That will also probably suffice. Then I would like to show you here a very interesting fax letter from a priest which I received on the 10th of April. If you want to read it?
It seems to be important to you.
I do find it so, yes.
Then I want to read it.
Here you go.
Thank you.
Ptah reads letter.
Amazing. But this letter proves that both your work and that of Hans Georg and all the group members is bearing very good fruit, and that the mission is not in vain. And as this letter says, the whole thing is also finding its entrance into the ranks of the priests. The future will bring many more successes, against all odds, which will come up again and again and will be directed against you, the group members, and against the whole mission. The truth of your teaching can no longer be stopped, for the point where this could have been the case has long since passed. And that this has indeed succeeded, for which the thanks of all those who have slandered you over and over again and discredited the entire mission and the group members cannot be denied. The malicious actions of all your adversaries have, since your appearance, brought only disadvantages for them, because their first apparent successes of their infamy have always been great successes for you, your mission, and for the loyal and unswerving members of the group. Disadvantages only arose for the fallible and treacherous members, who in the course of time, however, removed themselves from the group and from the truth in order to miserably lead a life which does not bring them true satisfaction and often brings them into distress and trouble.
Your words sound good, very good even. You are right. Also, different priests and also parishioners have turned to the teaching of the truth, not only in Germany, but also here in my homeland as well as in the USA and in Korea. But the fact that the priestly little sheep are falling away from the Catholic Church will probably not make the new Pope very happy, who will be elected in 3 days or on the 19th of April. Now one may talk openly about it, because the time has come for it. Years ago you said that the new Pope will be a German, namely the arch-conservative and reactionary dogmatic guru Curia Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who will probably continue in the same or even more conservative style as Karol Wojtyla or Pope John Paul II. What will the new Pope call himself?
Benedict XVI, and to him it can be said that he will be one of those popes who is absorbed in his Catholic faith and who is very strictly religious.
I see. He will not bring good things, because his arch-conservatism will certainly not bring innovations in terms of greater religious, cultic, and behavioral freedom for the faithful, but rather more restrictions, which will keep the faithful in bondage. But according to your earlier statements, he will not hold his pontificate for very long. But let's leave that, because there is nothing to change. What is going to happen in the future?
The whole Indian Ocean region will continue to be affected by seaquakes and volcanic eruptions for a long time to come. Next, in the Comoros, The Kartala volcano will become active again in this regard, erupting lava, after which Japan will be hit again by an earthquake with a magnitude of 5.6. Then comes the time when the first case of human disease caused by the prion epidemic will become known in Holland. For the time being, that is all the things that need to be mentioned. Maybe I can tell you more when I come in next Thursday for the proofreading. Besides, time has come again, so I must say goodbye. Goodbye, Edward. Farewell, Salome.
Take care, Ptah, my friend. Salome and goodbye.